Ladies and gentlemen, today we dive into a place shrouded in fear, a prison so notorious that its name alone sends chills down the spine, Klong Prem. Known as the prison of no return, this Thai penitentiary has become a symbol of extreme punishment, unbreakable walls, and shattered dreams. Klong Prem Central Prison is located in Bangkok, Thailand's bustling capital, but it is a world away from the vibrant city streets and tourist attractions. Behind its high, imposing walls lies a facility that has gained a reputation as one of the most feared prisons in Southeast Asia. It is not just the harsh conditions that have earned it this status, but the sheer hopelessness that inmates experience once they step inside. Thailand is known for its strict judicial system, particularly when it comes to drug offenses. The country enforces some of the toughest drug laws in the world, often handing down decades-long sentences, or even the death penalty, for crimes that would carry much lighter sentences in other nations. This has led to an influx of both Thai and foreign inmates into Klong Prem, many of whom were caught unaware of the severity of Thailand's legal system. Nicknamed the Bangkok Hilton, though there is nothing luxurious about it, Klong Prem is divided into several sections, including a maximum security unit for serious offenders. While some prisoners are serving life sentences for violent crimes, many others find themselves trapped here for offenses that, in different circumstances, might have warranted rehabilitation rather than endless punishment. But what truly sets Klong Prem apart is its reputation for being nearly inescapable, both physically and mentally. The phrase prison of no return is not just about the high walls and tight security. It reflects the hopeless reality faced by prisoners. For many, once they enter Klong Prem, they will never walk free again. Whether it is due to impossibly long sentences, legal bureaucracy, or the crushing psychological effects of incarceration, the vast majority of inmates will never return to the lives they once knew. Thailand's justice system is unforgiving, and once someone is convicted, their fate is often sealed. Appeals are rare, and foreign prisoners face an especially difficult battle to seek assistance from their embassies. The legal process moves slowly, and the lack of financial resources or connections often means that prisoners remain stuck in the system with no way out. The sheer number of foreign inmates trapped in Klong Prem is a testament to how quickly life can take a devastating turn. Many are tourists or expatriates who found themselves on the wrong side of the law, sometimes due to minor infractions or misunderstandings. But in Thailand, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Once inside Klong Prem, they realize that this is not just a prison. It is a place where time stands still and hope fades away. For those who dream of escape, reality hits hard. The prison is fortified with multiple layers of security, including high walls, armed guards, and internal monitoring. Few have ever managed to break free, and those who have attempted escape often faced brutal consequences. The thought of freedom lingers in the minds of many, but the reality is that Klong Prem is a place designed to keep people in, not let them out. As we continue to explore the grim realities of this infamous prison, we must ask ourselves, should justice be about rehabilitation, or should it be a lifetime of suffering? Klong Prem Central Prison, located in the heart of Bangkok, Thailand, is a name that instills fear in both locals and foreigners alike. Despite being situated in one of the most vibrant and bustling cities in the world, life inside its walls is anything but lively. Instead, it is a place of despair, isolation, and hopelessness. Over the years, Klong Prem has built a reputation as one of the toughest and most unforgiving prisons in Southeast Asia. It is often referred to as the prison of no return because, for many inmates, stepping inside its gates means losing all hope of freedom. Unlike the grand palaces and golden temples that symbolize Thailand's cultural beauty, Klong Prem represents the dark side of the country's justice system. Its high concrete walls, topped with razor wire, conceal the grim reality of life inside. The air around the prison feels heavy, not just because of its physical structure, but because of the countless stories of suffering that have unfolded within its cells. Those who end up in Klong Prem quickly realize that this is no ordinary prison. It is a place where time moves slowly, and every day feels like a lifetime. Thailand is known for its strict laws, particularly when it comes to drug-related offenses. The country has some of the harshest drug penalties in the world, with long sentences and even the death penalty for those caught trafficking illegal substances. Because of this, a significant portion of Klong Prem's population consists of drug offenders, many of whom are foreigners who were unaware of the severity of Thai law. Tourists, backpackers, and expatriates have all found themselves trapped behind these bars, serving lengthy sentences for crimes that, in other countries, might have resulted in only a fine or a short-term punishment. Despite being labeled a correctional facility, Klong Prem is notorious for being anything but rehabilitative. Instead of offering prisoners a chance at reform, it is a place where hope is systematically crushed. The prison is divided into different sections, including a maximum security area that holds some of the country's most dangerous criminals. Each section is overcrowded, with thousands of inmates packed into small, cramped cells. In some cases, there are so many prisoners that they must take turns sleeping on the floor, as there are not enough beds to accommodate them all. Foreign prisoners, in particular, find themselves at an extreme disadvantage. The language barrier makes it difficult to communicate with guards or fellow inmates, and legal assistance is often hard to come by. Many are unable to contact their families due to the limited access to communication, leaving them feeling completely isolated from the outside world. Some embassies try to intervene, but Thailand's strict legal system makes it difficult for foreigners to secure early releases or sentence reductions. Adding to the prison's notorious reputation is its lack of transparency. Unlike some prisons that allow for media coverage or independent inspections, Klong Prem operates largely behind closed doors. Stories of abuse, corruption, and mistreatment leak out from time to time, but the full extent of what happens inside remains largely unknown. Some former inmates have spoken out about their experiences, painting a grim picture of life inside. They describe an environment where survival depends on bribery, connections, and sheer willpower. For those sentenced to life in Klong Prem, the reality is heartbreaking. Many will never see freedom again, even for crimes that would not warrant such extreme punishment elsewhere. The slow-moving legal system, combined with the harshness of the prison environment, makes it clear why this place has earned its nickname. The reputation of Klong Prem extends far beyond Thailand's borders. It is a place that serves as a warning to anyone who underestimates the country's strict laws. It is a prison that does not forgive, does not forget, and rarely gives second chances. Once inside, the dream of returning home often fades into a distant memory. For those who enter Klong Prem, the reality of prison life sets in quickly. The harsh conditions inside are unlike anything most people can imagine, and for many inmates, especially foreigners, the experience is nothing short of a nightmare. Overcrowding, extreme heat, poor hygiene, malnutrition, and violence are just a few of the everyday struggles prisoners face in this unforgiving facility. Klong Prem was originally built to house a much smaller number of inmates, but today, it is filled far beyond its capacity. Cells that were designed for a handful of prisoners now hold dozens, forcing inmates to sleep on hard concrete floors or thin mats, often in positions so cramped that they cannot even stretch their legs. In some cases, prisoners must take turns sleeping because there is not enough room for everyone to lie down at the same time. The lack of proper ventilation makes the overcrowding even worse, as the stifling heat and humidity become unbearable, especially in the summer months. Sanitation inside the prison is another major issue. Toilets are often nothing more than holes in the ground, shared by large numbers of inmates with little privacy. Clean water is limited, making personal hygiene a constant struggle. Many prisoners suffer from skin infections, rashes, and other diseases due to the unsanitary conditions. With so many people crammed into small spaces, the spread of illness is almost inevitable. Food in Klong Prem is barely enough to survive on. Prisoners are given small portions of rice and watery soup, often containing little to no meat or vegetables. The quality of the food is poor, and reports of spoiled or contaminated meals are common. Those who have money can sometimes bribe guards or buy extra food from the prison canteen, but for those who cannot afford it, hunger becomes a daily battle. Malnutrition is a widespread problem, and prisoners often become weak and frail over time. One of the most terrifying aspects of life inside Klong Prem is the violence that lurks around every corner. Inmates are often forced into fights, either by fellow prisoners or by guards who turn a blind eye to the brutality. Gangs operate within the prison, controlling access to basic necessities and punishing those who do not comply with their demands. Beatings, stabbings, and other forms of violence are common, and there is little protection for those who become targets. Discipline inside Klong Prem is strict, and punishments for breaking the rules are severe. Prisoners who step out of line, whether by arguing with a guard, refusing to follow orders, or even speaking out against the conditions, can face brutal consequences. Solitary confinement, beatings, and extended sentences are just some of the ways that discipline is enforced. For foreign inmates, the adjustment to these conditions is especially difficult. Many arrive in Thailand as tourists, never expecting to find themselves locked inside one of the country's toughest prisons. The culture shock is overwhelming, and without knowledge of the Thai language, even simple tasks like understanding prison rules or requesting medical help become nearly impossible. Some foreign prisoners have described the experience as feeling like they have been dropped into another world, one where survival depends on adapting quickly to the harsh realities of prison life. The combination of overcrowding, lack of hygiene, poor nutrition, violence, and brutal discipline creates an environment where hope is almost non-existent. Inmates must endure these conditions for years, sometimes decades, with little chance of escape or relief. For many, the suffering inside Klong Prem is worse than the crime they were convicted of, and the thought of spending the rest of their lives in such a place is a fate worse than death. Discipline inside Klong Prem is not just strict, it is often brutal, unforgiving, and in many cases, inhumane. The prison operates under a harsh system of control, where even the smallest infractions can lead to severe punishment. Inmates quickly learn that any disobedience, no matter how minor, can result in physical and psychological suffering. The authorities justify these harsh measures as necessary to maintain order, but in reality, the system fosters fear, violence, and extreme oppression. From the moment a prisoner enters Klong Prem, they are stripped of their dignity. New arrivals are often subjected to humiliating initiation rituals, where they are forced to sit on the ground for hours, endure verbal abuse, and sometimes even physical beatings. Guards assert their dominance immediately, making it clear that defiance will not be tolerated. Foreign prisoners, unfamiliar with the unspoken rules of the prison, often find themselves singled out for harsher treatment simply because they do not know how to behave within the system. Inside the prison, discipline is enforced in several ways. One of the most common methods is corporal punishment. Guards routinely beat inmates with batons, wooden sticks, or even their bare hands. These beatings can be administered for offenses as minor as speaking out of turn, failing to bow to an officer, or not following orders quickly enough. There are reports of prisoners being kicked, slapped, and even tied up and whipped as a form of punishment. The violence is often public, serving as a warning to others not to step out of line. Solitary confinement is another widely used form of punishment. Prisoners who break the rules, or are simply accused of doing so, can be thrown into tiny, dark, and filthy isolation cells. These cells are barely large enough to sit or lie down in, and inmates are left there for days or even weeks at a time, often with little food or water. In complete isolation, many prisoners begin to suffer from severe mental health issues, including hallucinations and paranoia. The psychological toll of solitary confinement can be just as devastating as physical abuse, breaking a person's spirit completely. Forced labor is also a form of punishment. Many prisoners are made to work for long hours under brutal conditions, doing tasks such as sewing, construction, or cleaning. Those who refuse or fail to meet quotas are beaten or given even harsher tasks. The work is exhausting, and prisoners are rarely given proper tools or protection. Some of the work is dangerous, and injuries are common. Despite the hard labor, prisoners receive little to no compensation, and the work often serves as just another method of control and dehumanization. One of the most terrifying aspects of discipline in Klong Prem is the use of collective punishment. If one prisoner misbehaves, an entire group or cell block may be punished along with them. This means that even those who follow the rules can suffer because of the actions of others. This creates a culture of fear, where prisoners are constantly watching each other, afraid that someone else's mistake will bring punishment down on them as well. It also leads to a brutal hierarchy within the prison, where stronger inmates enforce discipline on weaker ones to avoid collective punishment. Abuse by prison guards is not the only threat prisoners face. Violence between inmates is also a form of discipline. In Klong Prem, gangs and prison leaders maintain their own set of rules, often harsher than those enforced by the guards. Inmates who fail to show respect to higher-ranking prisoners, owe debts, or refuse to follow orders can be beaten, stabbed, or worse. Guards often turn a blind eye to this violence, as it helps maintain control without them having to get directly involved. For foreign prisoners, the brutality of Klong Prem's discipline system can be overwhelming. Many are unfamiliar with Thai prison culture and unknowingly break rules that they did not even realize existed. They may fail to bow to a guard, speak when they are supposed to remain silent, or refuse to participate in rituals of submission. Without local connections or knowledge of the language, they often have no way to defend themselves, making them easy targets for both guards and fellow inmates. Prisoners who try to protest against mistreatment or report abuse often find themselves punished even more severely. Complaints about brutality are usually ignored, and those who speak out may be labeled as troublemakers, leading to further beatings, isolation, or extended sentences. The legal system offers little protection, and prisoners quickly learn that their survival depends on obedience, silence, and submission. For those serving long sentences, the endless cycle of violence, forced labor, and humiliation becomes a way of life. There is no escape from the brutality, and over time, many prisoners lose all hope of ever experiencing justice or dignity again. Klong Prem is not just a prison for Thai nationals. It is also home to a large number of foreign inmates who find themselves trapped in a system they barely understand. Many of these prisoners are tourists, expatriates, or travelers who made one mistake, or in some cases, were victims of unfortunate circumstances and ended up in one of the harshest prison environments in the world. For foreign inmates, the experience of being incarcerated in Klong Prem is especially brutal. They are thousands of miles away from home, separated from their families, and often have little to no understanding of the Thai language or legal system. This language barrier alone creates an immediate and overwhelming sense of isolation. Unlike Thai prisoners, who can at least communicate with guards and fellow inmates, many foreigners struggle to ask for basic necessities, understand prison rules, or even defend themselves against false accusations. One of the most common reasons foreigners end up in Klong Prem is drug-related offenses. Thailand has some of the strictest drug laws in the world, and even possessing a small amount of illegal substances can result in a lengthy prison sentence. Many tourists are caught off guard by these harsh laws, not realizing that what might be considered a minor offense in their home country is treated as a serious crime in Thailand. Some are arrested during police raids in popular tourist areas, while others are caught at the airport, often unaware that they are carrying something illegal. In some cases, foreign prisoners claim they were set up, either by corrupt law enforcement officials looking for bribes or by traffickers who use them as unwitting drug mules. Regardless of the circumstances of their arrest, once they enter Klong Prem, their chances of a fair trial or early release are slim. The Thai legal system moves slowly, and foreign prisoners often do not have the resources to hire good lawyers. Some embassies try to assist, but their influence is limited, and diplomatic interventions rarely lead to reduced sentences. Life inside the prison is even harder for foreigners because they do not have the same social support system as Thai inmates. Thai prisoners often receive visits from their families, who bring them extra food, money, and supplies to make prison life more bearable. Foreigners, on the other hand, are often completely alone. Their families are too far away to visit, and many cannot afford to send money or packages regularly. Without external support, foreign prisoners are left to survive on the meager prison rations and harsh conditions. Without money, life in Klong Prem is even more brutal. Prisoners who have financial resources can bribe guards for better treatment, buy extra food from the prison canteen, and even secure slightly better living conditions. But for foreigners who have no money and no outside help, survival becomes a daily struggle. They are often left with no choice but to rely on the kindness of other inmates or suffer in extreme deprivation. Another major issue foreign prisoners face is the sheer unpredictability of their fate. Some serve their full sentences, while others spend years behind bars before being transferred back to their home countries under prisoner exchange agreements. However, these agreements are rare and depend on diplomatic negotiations that can take years. Many foreign prisoners hold on to the hope that they will one day be transferred, but for most, that hope fades as the years go by with no progress. The psychological toll of imprisonment in Klong Prem is devastating for foreign inmates. Many suffer from extreme depression, anxiety, and hopelessness. Some have no idea when or if they will ever be free again. The stress of surviving in an unfamiliar and dangerous environment, combined with the lack of emotional support, often leads to severe mental health issues. Some prisoners even attempt suicide, seeing no other way out of their suffering. For those who do manage to secure an early release or prisoner transfer, the scars of Klong Prem remain with them for life. Many former inmates describe their time in the prison as the most traumatic experience they have ever endured. The brutality, isolation, and despair they faced behind those walls haunt them long after they regain their freedom. Life inside Klong Prem is not just a test of physical endurance, it is a relentless assault on the mind. The prison's harsh conditions, brutal discipline, and overwhelming sense of hopelessness take a severe psychological toll on inmates, breaking them down mentally and emotionally. For many, the suffering in Klong Prem is not just about surviving the physical hardships but enduring the slow, crushing descent into despair. From the moment a prisoner enters Klong Prem, their mental battle begins. The initial shock of imprisonment is overwhelming, especially for those who have never experienced incarceration before. The realization that they are trapped in one of Thailand's most notorious prisons, possibly for years or even life, is a devastating blow. Foreign prisoners, in particular, struggle to process the reality of their situation. Many arrived in Thailand as tourists, enjoying the beaches and nightlife, only to suddenly find themselves locked in a cell with no clear path to freedom. The contrast between their previous life and their new reality is so extreme that it often leads to severe emotional distress. One of the biggest contributors to psychological suffering in Klong Prem is hopelessness. Unlike in some prison systems where inmates can work toward parole or rehabilitation, the rigid and unforgiving nature of Thai law means that many prisoners see no light at the end of the tunnel. Long sentences, slow-moving appeals, and the lack of proper legal assistance make it difficult for inmates to hold on to hope. For foreign prisoners, the process is even more complicated, as they often do not fully understand the legal system and have little to no external support to fight their cases. Overcrowding also plays a major role in the mental deterioration of prisoners. Being crammed into a tiny cell with dozens of other inmates, with no personal space or privacy, creates a constant feeling of suffocation. Inmates must learn to sleep in shifts, endure endless noise, and navigate tense relationships with cellmates who are also struggling with their own mental battles. The inability to escape from this environment, even for a moment, causes extreme stress and anxiety. The relentless monotony of prison life further erodes the mind. Days inside Klong Prem follow the same grueling routine, with little to no variation. There are no distractions, no sense of progress, and no personal growth. Time seems to stretch endlessly, making even short sentences feel like an eternity. The lack of intellectual stimulation or meaningful activity leaves prisoners trapped in their own thoughts, often leading to deep depression. Solitary confinement, used as a form of punishment, is one of the most psychologically damaging aspects of Klong Prem. Being locked away in a tiny, dark cell with no human contact for days or weeks at a time can drive even the strongest minds to the brink of insanity. Prisoners in solitary often experience hallucinations, extreme paranoia, and uncontrollable anxiety. The complete isolation strips them of any sense of reality, and for some, the mental scars of solitary confinement never heal. Abuse and violence also contribute to the severe mental health decline of prisoners. Living in constant fear, whether of the guards, fellow inmates, or gang members, creates a state of permanent stress. Many inmates suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, due to the beatings, humiliation, and cruelty they endure on a daily basis. The unpredictability of violence means that prisoners are always on edge, never able to relax or feel safe. For those who suffer from pre-existing mental health conditions, Klong Prem becomes an inescapable nightmare. The prison provides little to no access to psychological care, leaving inmates with depression, anxiety, or other disorders to suffer in silence. Those who break down emotionally are often ignored, ridiculed, or even punished, rather than given the help they need. For some prisoners, the mental suffering becomes too much to bear. Suicidal thoughts are common, and some inmates take their own lives, seeing no other way out. The feeling of being forgotten by the world, of being trapped in a system that does not care, pushes many to the edge. Even for those who eventually leave Klong Prem, whether through release or extradition, the psychological scars remain. Many former inmates struggle with severe PTSD, unable to reintegrate into society after experiencing years of extreme trauma. They are haunted by nightmares, suffer from anxiety and paranoia, and often find it difficult to trust anyone again. Some never fully recover from the mental torture they endured behind those prison walls. One of the most harrowing aspects of life inside Klong Prem is the sheer lack of medical care. For prisoners suffering from illness, injury, or chronic conditions, the prison's healthcare system offers little hope. Neglect, overcrowding, and a severe shortage of medical resources create a deadly environment where even the simplest ailments can turn fatal. The combination of poor hygiene, malnutrition, and violent conditions means that prisoners are constantly at risk, yet help is often nowhere to be found. The prison clinic, meant to serve thousands of inmates, is drastically under-equipped. There are few doctors, limited medical supplies, and virtually no access to specialized care. Inmates who fall sick must wait for days, sometimes even weeks, just to be seen by a medical officer. When they are finally examined, the treatment they receive is often inadequate. Painkillers and basic antibiotics are the most common form of treatment, regardless of the illness. Whether a prisoner is suffering from a severe infection, internal injuries, or a chronic disease, they are usually given nothing more than a handful of pills and sent back to their overcrowded cells. The lack of proper hygiene within Klong Prem only worsens the medical crisis. With hundreds of inmates crammed into tight spaces, infections spread rapidly. Skin diseases, respiratory infections, and gastrointestinal illnesses are common due to the filthy living conditions. Prisoners have limited access to clean water, and soap is a luxury that many cannot afford. The shared toilets and lack of proper sanitation create the perfect breeding ground for bacteria and disease. Once an infection takes hold, it spreads quickly through the prison, putting everyone at risk. Malnutrition is another major health issue within Klong Prem. The food provided to prisoners is barely enough to sustain them, both in quantity and nutritional value. Meals often consist of nothing more than rice and watery soup, with little to no protein or vegetables. As a result, prisoners suffer from severe vitamin deficiencies, leading to weakened immune systems, fatigue, and chronic health problems. Many inmates experience extreme weight loss, their bodies wasting away over time due to prolonged malnutrition. Those who have money can sometimes buy better food from the prison canteen, but for the majority, hunger and weakness become a daily struggle. For those who suffer serious injuries, whether from violent encounters, work-related accidents, or beatings by guards, the situation is even more dire. Wounds are often left untreated, leading to infections that can become life-threatening. Broken bones are rarely set properly, leaving prisoners to heal on their own in excruciating pain. Internal injuries, which require immediate medical attention, are often ignored entirely. Without access to proper medical care, many prisoners endure unimaginable suffering, their conditions worsening until they are beyond help. Chronic illnesses are practically a death sentence in Klong Prem. Prisoners with conditions such as diabetes, heart disease, or respiratory issues struggle to get the medication and treatment they need. In some cases, they are completely denied access to life-saving drugs, leading to slow and painful deterioration. Those with mental health disorders receive no psychiatric care, forcing them to suffer in silence as their conditions worsen. The lack of treatment not only endangers the lives of these inmates, but also creates a dangerous environment, as untreated mental illness can lead to violent outbursts or complete psychological breakdowns. HIV and tuberculosis, TB, are particularly widespread in Klong Prem. Due to the overcrowded conditions, TB spreads easily, infecting prisoners who have little means of protecting themselves. The prison's failure to separate infected inmates from the general population only accelerates the spread of disease. Similarly, HIV is a major concern, as unsafe conditions, lack of medical education, and violent assaults contribute to high infection rates. Those diagnosed with these illnesses often receive no treatment, left to die slowly as their bodies deteriorate. Even when prisoners are at death's door, they are often denied proper care. Inmates who are terminally ill are sometimes placed in makeshift sick bays, where they lie on the floor, barely conscious, waiting for the inevitable. Others simply die in their cells, their suffering unnoticed until it is too late. The lack of medical intervention means that many prisoners meet their end long before their sentences are complete. Foreign inmates face additional challenges when it comes to medical care. Many do not know how to navigate the prison's healthcare system, and without the ability to communicate in Thai, they struggle to explain their symptoms. Some embassies attempt to intervene on behalf of their citizens, but even diplomatic pressure rarely leads to significant improvements in medical treatment. For foreign prisoners, falling seriously ill in Klong Prem is a terrifying experience, as they know they may not receive the care they need to survive. The failure of Klong Prem's medical system is not just a matter of neglect, it is a slow and systematic form of suffering. Prisoners who fall ill are left to fend for themselves, with no guarantee that they will ever receive help. The combination of inadequate health care, malnutrition, and unsanitary conditions creates an environment where survival is a daily battle, and for many, death is the only escape. Klong Prem is not just a place of confinement. It is a world ruled by corruption, where money and influence dictate survival. The official prison system operates on paper, but beneath the surface, an entirely different hierarchy controls daily life. Those with financial resources can buy privileges, security, and even freedom, while those without are left to suffer under the crushing weight of an unfair system. The corruption in Klong Prem is not hidden. It is an open secret, a reality that every prisoner must either navigate or be consumed by. At the core of this corruption is the prison staff itself. Guards, who are poorly paid and often undertrained, see the prison as an opportunity for profit. Many engage in bribery, extortion, and smuggling operations, using their authority to control the flow of money and goods inside the prison walls. Everything in Klong Prem has a price: better food, safer sleeping conditions, access to medical care, and even protection from violence. Prisoners who have money, either from family or outside connections, can buy a more tolerable existence. Those who have nothing must endure the worst of what the prison has to offer. Bribes are a way of life in Klong Prem. Prisoners must often pay just to get their basic rights recognized. Need a transfer to a less crowded cell? That will cost money. Want to avoid forced labor? That, too, requires a payment. Even access to medical treatment often depends on bribery. Those who can pay receive medication and doctor visits, while those who cannot are left to suffer. Guards openly demand bribes, knowing that prisoners have little choice but to comply. Corruption extends beyond just material comforts. It can mean the difference between life and death. Klong Prem is notorious for its brutal violence, where gangs and powerful inmates enforce their own laws. But protection can be bought. Wealthy prisoners often pay guards or gang leaders for security, ensuring they are not targeted for beatings, extortion, or worse. Those without money live in constant fear, vulnerable to both the guards and the inmates who wield power inside the prison. Drugs are another major part of the corruption in Klong Prem. Despite Thailand's strict drug laws, narcotics flow freely within the prison walls, often smuggled in by the very people meant to enforce the rules. Guards, working with outside dealers and powerful inmates, oversee a lucrative drug trade that thrives within the prison. Methamphetamine, heroin, and other substances are readily available for a price. Addiction becomes yet another tool of control, as prisoners who develop dependencies become trapped in a cycle of debt and violence. The corruption does not stop at the guards. It reaches into the upper levels of the prison administration. High-ranking officials often turn a blind eye to the illegal activities within Klong Prem, either because they are benefiting from the system or because they see no way to change it. Some officials are directly involved, taking cuts from bribes and illicit trade. Others simply do not care, allowing the prison to function under its own lawless system. Complaints about corruption rarely lead to change, as those who speak out often face retaliation, either from the guards themselves or from the prisoners who profit from the system. Foreign prisoners are particularly vulnerable to corruption, as they often do not understand the unspoken rules that govern the prison. Many arrive at Klong Prem expecting some level of fairness, only to quickly realize that justice does not exist behind these walls. Without connections, money, or local knowledge, foreign inmates are easy targets for extortion. Guards may demand bribes simply to grant them basic rights, and fellow inmates may exploit their ignorance for personal gain. Some embassies attempt to intervene, but their influence is limited, and in many cases, they can do little to protect their citizens from the corruption that defines life in Klong Prem. Even the possibility of early release is often tied to corruption. While official policies dictate parole and sentence reductions, in practice, these opportunities are often reserved for those who can pay. Wealthy or well-connected prisoners sometimes secure reduced sentences through behind-the-scenes deals, while others are left to serve their full terms, regardless of their behavior or circumstances. The idea that justice is for sale only adds to the hopelessness that pervades the prison. For many prisoners, corruption becomes a survival strategy. They learn to navigate the system, using whatever resources they have to secure better conditions. Some become involved in the illicit trade themselves, using smuggling and bribery to gain influence. Others resign themselves to their fate, knowing that without money, they are powerless. The corruption within Klong Prem is not just an inconvenience, it is the very structure upon which the prison operates. Those who understand it may find ways to endure, but those who do not are left to suffer under its weight. Klong Prem is not just a prison, it is a battlefield where the strong prey on the weak, and violence is a daily reality. From the moment an inmate steps inside its walls, they are thrown into a world where survival depends not just on endurance, but on understanding the unspoken laws of brutality. Beatings, stabbings, gang warfare, and outright murder are common occurrences, and the authorities often do little to stop it. For many prisoners, life in Klong Prem is a constant state of fear, where one wrong move can mean the difference between life and death. The violence begins with the guards themselves. Beatings are a routine part of life in Klong Prem, often administered as a form of punishment, intimidation, or simply as an outlet for the frustrations of those in power. New prisoners, especially foreigners or those perceived as weak, are often subjected to humiliating initiation beatings designed to break their spirit from the very start. Guards wield batons, fists, and sometimes even electric shocks to assert their dominance. Complaints about abuse are ignored, and prisoners quickly learn that resisting or speaking out only leads to harsher treatment. Gangs are another source of relentless violence. Klong Prem operates under a strict prisoner hierarchy, where powerful gangs enforce their own rules, often with more authority than the guards themselves. These gangs control everything, from the distribution of food and drugs to access to safer sleeping areas. They decide who is protected and who becomes a target. Inmates who refuse to follow their orders, who fail to pay debts, or who simply get caught in the wrong place at the wrong time are met with swift and brutal punishment. Fights break out frequently, sometimes over the smallest provocation, a glance, an insult, or even just being in the wrong cell. Weapons are improvised from anything available: sharpened toothbrushes, metal scraps, and even plastic items melted into makeshift knives. Inmates who engage in these fights often have no choice. It is kill or be killed. Those who refuse to fight are seen as weak and become even bigger targets for future violence. For some, forced labor adds another layer of brutality. Prisoners are often assigned to grueling work details, whether in the kitchens, factories, or maintenance crews. Those who fail to meet expectations face violent punishments from both guards and fellow prisoners. Beatings, sleep deprivation, and starvation are common tactics used to force compliance. Injuries sustained during labor are rarely treated, leaving inmates to suffer through broken bones, infections, and extreme exhaustion. Foreign prisoners are especially vulnerable to violence. They often do not understand the complex social codes of the prison, making them easy targets for extortion and abuse. Many foreign inmates report being beaten simply because they failed to show the proper respect to the right people. Without connections or gang affiliation, they are isolated and unprotected, left to navigate the chaos on their own. Some embassies attempt to intervene, but their influence within Klong Prem is limited, and many foreign prisoners find themselves abandoned in an environment where brute force is the only language that matters. Sexual violence is another unspoken horror of Klong Prem. With overcrowded cells and a lack of protection, weaker inmates, especially young or physically smaller ones, are frequently targeted for assault. Guards rarely intervene, and in some cases, they turn a blind eye or even facilitate the abuse in exchange for bribes. Victims of sexual violence have no recourse, as reporting the crime only leads to further punishment or social isolation. Many choose to remain silent, living in constant fear of their next attack. Revenge killings are also a part of prison life. Inmates who cross the wrong people, owe debts, or are suspected of informing on others often do not live to see another day. These killings are often brutal, meant to send a message to others about the consequences of disobedience. Some prisoners disappear overnight, their bodies quietly disposed of, while others are killed in full view of their fellow inmates as a warning. Even the prison's so-called safe zones offer no real protection. Isolation cells, where inmates are placed for their own safety or as punishment, often become torture chambers. Those held in solitary confinement are still vulnerable to guard abuse, starvation, and psychological torment. Instead of being a place of refuge, these areas often become places of extreme suffering, where prisoners are left to break down mentally and physically. Surviving in Klong Prem means learning how to navigate this world of violence. Some prisoners align themselves with powerful gangs for protection, while others pay bribes to ensure they are left alone. The weak suffer, and the strong thrive. The guards, indifferent to the suffering around them, often encourage this brutal hierarchy, using it to maintain control over the population. For many inmates, the psychological toll of this constant violence is just as devastating as the physical harm. The daily fear of attack, the sight of brutal beatings, and the knowledge that there is no escape from this cycle of cruelty leave deep scars. Some prisoners withdraw completely, living in a state of silent terror, while others become numb to the suffering around them, accepting violence as an inevitable part of life. Those who do make it out of Klong Prem often carry the trauma with them forever. They leave with broken bodies, shattered minds, and memories of brutality that haunt them long after their sentences have ended. Inside Klong Prem, prisoners are not just inmates. They are workers, forced into a brutal system of labor that benefits both the prison authorities and the outside world. Many expect prison to be a place of punishment, but few realize that for countless prisoners, it is also a place of relentless, unpaid, and inhumane work. The prison operates like a massive factory, where inmates are turned into a disposable workforce, their labor exploited for profit. Every prisoner is expected to work, regardless of their physical or mental condition. From the moment they enter Klong Prem, they are assigned to different types of labor, ranging from industrial production to maintenance tasks. The work is backbreaking, the hours are long, and the conditions are harsh. There is no choice in the matter. Those who refuse to work are beaten, denied food, or subjected to other forms of punishment. Work becomes another form of control, a way to break the spirit of prisoners and ensure obedience. The most common form of forced labor inside Klong Prem is industrial work. Prisoners are often forced to produce goods such as textiles, furniture, and handicrafts, many of which are later sold on the international market. These products are made under grueling conditions, with inmates working long hours in overcrowded workshops, often without proper ventilation or breaks. They receive no wages, no recognition, and no protection. The profits from their labor go directly to the prison system, creating a hidden economy where prisoners become little more than disposable laborers. Aside from industrial work, prisoners are also assigned to maintenance tasks within the prison itself. They clean the filthy hallways, repair broken infrastructure, cook meals for thousands of inmates, and perform other essential duties that keep the prison running. These jobs are physically demanding and often dangerous. Prisoners working in the kitchens, for example, must prepare massive amounts of food with limited supplies, often using outdated and unsafe equipment. Those assigned to construction work are forced to carry heavy materials under the scorching sun, sometimes without shoes or protective gear. Injuries are common, but medical treatment is rare. For some prisoners, forced labor takes an even darker turn. Certain inmates are forced to serve as personal servants for powerful prisoners or corrupt guards. They must clean their cells, fetch their food, or run errands without question. Failure to obey results in severe beatings or even worse consequences. This unofficial system of servitude is yet another example of how power operates within Klong Prem. Those with influence live in relative comfort, while those without are reduced to slaves. Foreign prisoners are not exempt from forced labor. In fact, they often face even harsher conditions, as they lack the connections or local knowledge to resist. Many foreign inmates are forced into the hardest jobs, such as construction, cleaning, or working in the most overcrowded factories. Language barriers make it even more difficult for them to understand orders or protest mistreatment. Some embassies attempt to intervene, but their influence is limited, and many foreign prisoners are left to endure the same suffering as their Thai counterparts. One of the most inhumane aspects of forced labor in Klong Prem is the complete lack of compensation. Unlike some prison systems where inmates receive small wages for their work, prisoners in Klong Prem get nothing. They toil for hours every day without pay, without recognition, and without the hope of improving their situation. Their labor benefits the prison, the government, and sometimes private companies, but they themselves remain trapped in a cycle of endless exploitation. The conditions under which prisoners work are also incredibly dangerous. Factories are overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and filled with hazardous materials. There are no safety regulations, and injuries are treated with indifference. Prisoners who suffer accidents, whether a severed finger, a broken limb, or exposure to toxic chemicals, are rarely given medical attention. Instead, they are expected to continue working, regardless of their pain or suffering. Those who physically cannot continue are cast aside, left to fend for themselves without support. The psychological toll of forced labor is just as severe as the physical one. Many prisoners develop severe stress, anxiety, and depression due to the relentless work and lack of control over their own lives. The monotony of repetitive, exhausting labor wears them down, making them feel less like human beings and more like machines. The feeling of being exploited without any hope of escape leads many to despair. Some prisoners try to resist, but any attempt to protest is met with swift and brutal punishment. Beyond the individual suffering, forced labor inside Klong Prem is part of a much larger system of corruption. The prison authorities benefit immensely from the free labor force, using it to generate revenue and maintain control over inmates. The guards who oversee the work programs often take bribes to assign prisoners to less grueling tasks, creating another layer of economic exploitation within the prison walls. Even outside businesses sometimes profit from this hidden labor system, purchasing cheap goods made by prisoners who receive nothing for their efforts. For many prisoners, forced labor becomes a never-ending nightmare. They wake up each day knowing they will be forced to work until exhaustion, with no escape, no reward, and no future beyond the prison walls. The knowledge that their suffering directly benefits those who control them only adds to the feeling of helplessness. For many, the horrors of Klong Prem are not just physical but mental. While beatings, forced labor, and disease take a visible toll on prisoners, psychological torture is an even more insidious form of suffering. It is silent, invisible, and relentless, breaking the human spirit in ways that leave deep, lasting scars. Inside Klong Prem, prisoners are not just punished in body, they are slowly stripped of their sanity, their hope, and their very sense of self. One of the most effective methods of psychological torture is isolation. Prisoners who anger the guards, refuse to follow orders, or are deemed troublemakers are often thrown into solitary confinement. These cells are small, dark, and suffocating, with barely enough room to move. Inmates placed in solitary endure complete sensory deprivation, no human contact, no fresh air, no sense of time. Some are left there for days, others for weeks, and some for months. The mind deteriorates quickly in such conditions. Many prisoners experience hallucinations, crippling anxiety, and paranoia. Some begin to talk to themselves, while others fall into deep depression. Solitary confinement does not just punish prisoners. It dismantles their very sense of reality. Beyond isolation, sleep deprivation is another weapon used to break inmates mentally. Loud noises, bright lights, and sudden wake-up calls are common tactics used by guards to ensure prisoners never get proper rest. Sometimes, prisoners are forced to stand for hours on end without sleep, their bodies swaying from exhaustion but never allowed to collapse. Without rest, the mind begins to fail. Confusion sets in, emotions become uncontrollable, and rational thought fades away. Sleep deprivation turns strong men into broken shells, making them easier to control and less likely to resist. Verbal abuse and humiliation are everyday occurrences in Klong Prem. Guards constantly degrade prisoners, calling them names, mocking their suffering, and stripping away their dignity piece by piece. Foreign prisoners are especially vulnerable to this type of abuse, as they are often ridiculed for their inability to speak Thai, for their unfamiliarity with the brutal prison culture, and for their helplessness in a foreign system. Guards and even fellow inmates take pleasure in reminding them that they are alone, abandoned, and powerless. Another method of psychological torment is uncertainty and false hope. Prisoners are often left in the dark about their fate. Sentences are sometimes changed without warning, appeals are delayed indefinitely, and scheduled releases are suddenly canceled for no reason. Some prisoners are told they will be released soon, only to have their hopes crushed when their names never appear on the list. Others are threatened with longer sentences unless they comply with prison rules. This constant unpredictability destroys the mind. Prisoners are left in a permanent state of anxiety, unable to plan for the future or even trust in the possibility of freedom. Many inmates also experience forced helplessness, the realization that no matter how much they plead, protest, or beg, nothing will change. Medical care is denied without explanation, food rations are cut arbitrarily, and punishments are handed out without cause. Prisoners come to understand that their suffering is not a mistake, but a deliberate system designed to crush them. This feeling of complete powerlessness leads many to depression, self-harm, and even suicide. Forced betrayals are another form of psychological torment. Some prisoners are coerced into informing on others, knowing that refusing to do so could lead to severe punishment, or even death. They are forced to choose between their own survival and the safety of their fellow inmates. Once they inform, they are often hated by other prisoners, left isolated and untrusted. But if they refuse, they risk beatings, torture, or solitary confinement. There is no way out of this moral nightmare, and the guilt of such decisions can haunt prisoners for the rest of their lives. For many, the worst form of psychological torture is simply the endless monotony of suffering. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. The same unbearable routine, the same filth, the same brutality, repeated over and over again without any sense of progress or escape. This psychological stagnation breaks many prisoners more effectively than any physical abuse. Some lose the will to live entirely. They stop speaking, stop moving, stop eating, and simply waste away. Suicide becomes a tragic but common escape for those who can no longer endure the mental torment. Some hang themselves with makeshift ropes, others slash their wrists with broken objects, and some simply refuse to eat until their bodies give out. The prison authorities do little to prevent this. They often see suicides as one less inmate to manage. Those who attempt but fail are given no psychological support. Instead, they are punished, as if survival itself is a crime. The psychological torture of Klong Prem is not accidental, it is systematic. It ensures that prisoners remain broken, compliant, and hopeless. It strips away not just their freedom, but their very sense of humanity. Even those who survive and eventually leave Klong Prem rarely escape its grasp. The nightmares, paranoia, and emotional scars follow them for the rest of their lives. If there is one force that truly governs Klong Prem, it is not the official prison system, not the law, and certainly not justice. It is corruption. Corruption is the silent yet omnipresent architect of the prison's horrors, shaping every aspect of life inside its walls. From the moment an inmate steps through the gates of Klong Prem, they are thrown into a system where money, bribery, and power dictate survival. The guards, the prison officials, and even some prisoners all play a role in an elaborate network of exploitation, where justice is meaningless and everything has a price. For those who have money, Klong Prem is still a nightmare, but one with fewer horrors. Bribery is the key to a better existence. Wealthy prisoners, especially those connected to criminal organizations or with external financial support, can buy privileges that make life bearable. They can pay for private cells, better food, access to contraband, and even the ability to avoid forced labor. Some pay for protection from guards or prison gangs, ensuring that no one lays a hand on them. Money flows through the prison like blood, keeping the corrupt system alive and functioning. But for those without money, the reality is far darker. Prisoners who cannot afford to pay bribes face the full force of Klong Prem's cruelty. They are given the worst cells, the most brutal treatment, and the least amount of food. Many are deliberately placed in overcrowded and dangerous areas where violence is common, as a form of punishment for their inability to pay. Medical care is not a right, it is a commodity. If a prisoner falls ill, they must pay to see a doctor. If they are injured in a fight, they must bribe the guards just to receive basic treatment. Those without money are left to suffer, their wounds festering, their illnesses worsening, until they either recover on their own or die. Even basic necessities such as food and water are subject to corruption. The official prison rations are barely enough to keep a person alive, but prisoners with money can pay for extra food from the guards or black market suppliers within the prison. Those who cannot afford to do so are left to starve. Water, too, is a commodity. The prison provides only the bare minimum of drinking water, and it is often contaminated. Clean water must be purchased, creating yet another divide between those with money and those without. Corruption extends beyond just daily survival. It dictates a prisoner's very future. Sentences can be manipulated for the right price. Some prisoners manage to have their sentences reduced or their conditions improved by bribing officials. Others, particularly foreigners, are often extorted under the threat of extended imprisonment. There are documented cases of prisoners who were told they would not be released unless they paid a significant bribe, turning what should be a legal system into a hostage negotiation. The guards, the very people meant to maintain order, are some of the worst offenders. Many are deeply involved in smuggling operations, bringing in drugs, mobile phones, and other contraband in exchange for hefty bribes. They turn a blind eye to gang violence if the right amount of money is passed into their hands. Some guards even operate as enforcers for wealthy prisoners, carrying out beatings or punishments on their behalf. Justice does not exist within Klong Prem, only financial transactions. Foreign prisoners are often prime targets for corruption. Many arrive in Klong Prem unfamiliar with the unspoken rules of bribery and extortion, making them easy prey. From the moment they arrive, they are expected to pay just to be placed in a relatively safer cell. Those who do not understand the system are thrown into the worst living conditions, where they are left to suffer until they either learn how to navigate the corrupt system or find an external source of money. Lawyers, too, are often part of this corrupt network. Many prisoners find that the legal system offers little hope, as some lawyers are more interested in collecting bribes than in actually helping their clients. Some legal representatives charge excessive fees, but do little to fight for their client's case, knowing that in Klong Prem, money is more powerful than any legal argument. Even humanitarian efforts are sometimes tainted by corruption. Donations meant for prisoners, food, medicine, and other essentials, often never reach them. Instead, These supplies are sold on the black market inside the prison, or taken by corrupt officials for their own profit. Well-meaning charities and organizations often have no idea that their aid is being siphoned off before it can help the prisoners they intended to assist. For the majority of inmates, corruption means that they are trapped in a system where justice is an illusion. They know that no matter how well they behave, no matter how much they try to follow the rules, their fate depends entirely on their ability to pay. Those who cannot afford to buy their safety, their food, or even their freedom remain at the bottom of the prison hierarchy, subject to abuse, starvation, and suffering. Corruption in Klong Prem is not just a side effect of a broken system. It is the system. It ensures that suffering is not distributed equally, but is instead dictated by wealth and power. It turns justice into a commodity, survival into a privilege, and suffering into a business. Inside Klong Prem, survival is not just about enduring the physical and psychological torment inflicted by guards and the prison system. It is also about navigating the brutal hierarchy among prisoners themselves. Within these walls, inmates are not equal. They are divided into a rigid, ruthless structure where power determines fate and weakness invites destruction. The prison operates like a kingdom of suffering, where the strong dominate the weak, and every prisoner is forced to find their place in an unforgiving pecking order. At the top of this hierarchy are the gang leaders and powerful inmates. These individuals hold significant influence over the prison's internal structure, often through violence, money, or connections outside the prison. Many of these leaders are tied to organized crime, particularly drug cartels and mafia networks. They live in relative comfort, occupying the best cells, enjoying better food, and having access to contraband such as mobile phones, cigarettes, and even drugs. Their power is absolute, and even the guards often turn a blind eye to their actions, either out of fear or in exchange for bribes. Beneath them are the trusted enforcers, prisoners who serve as the gang leader's muscle. These are the ones who carry out beatings, enforce rules, and ensure that their leader's commands are followed without question. Enforcers are often the most violent prisoners, selected for their brutality and willingness to kill or maim without hesitation. Their job is to keep order within the gangs, collect debts, and punish those who disobey. For prisoners who cross the wrong people, these enforcers are their worst nightmare. A single wrong move, a misunderstood glance, or an unpaid debt can result in a savage beating, or worse. Below them are the workers and servants, prisoners who, while not at the bottom, are still under the control of the powerful few. Some of them work directly for the gangs, running errands, smuggling contraband, or acting as messengers. Others are forced into servitude, cleaning the cells of higher-ranking prisoners, cooking their meals, or even acting as personal bodyguards in exchange for protection. While their existence is harsh, it is often preferable to being completely unprotected. At the very bottom of the hierarchy are the weakest and most vulnerable inmates. These are the newcomers, the elderly, the sick, the mentally ill, and those without money, connections, or strength. Foreign prisoners often fall into this category, especially if they do not understand the unspoken rules of survival within Klong Prem. These inmates are treated like prey, beaten, exploited, and used by both fellow prisoners and corrupt guards. Many are forced into unpaid labor, cleaning toilets, scrubbing floors, or running errands for those above them. Some are subjected to even darker fates, becoming the targets of sexual violence, constant humiliation, and unending abuse. For many prisoners, the key to survival is aligning with a gang. While joining a gang means becoming part of a violent and corrupt system, it also offers protection from random brutality. Without a gang, an inmate is exposed, vulnerable to attacks from anyone who sees them as weak. However, joining a gang comes at a cost. Members must prove their loyalty, often by committing acts of violence themselves. Some are forced to attack other inmates as a test of allegiance. Others must participate in drug smuggling or extortion. Once a prisoner joins a gang, leaving is nearly impossible. Disloyalty is met with severe punishment, and betrayal often results in death. Another aspect of this brutal hierarchy is debt and extortion. Many prisoners, desperate for food, medicine, or even a moment of relief, borrow from those in power. But debts in Klong Prem are never simple financial transactions. They are chains that bind prisoners to their oppressors. Those who cannot repay their debts face brutal beatings, forced labor, or even execution. Some prisoners are made to pay their debts by carrying out violent acts on behalf of the gangs, ensuring that they are permanently trapped in a cycle of crime and brutality. The guards, rather than stopping this hierarchy, often support and manipulate it for their own benefit. They play prisoners against one another, offering favors to powerful inmates in exchange for loyalty. In some cases, guards deliberately allow fights to break out, using violence as a way to maintain control without having to intervene directly. Other times, they use prisoners as informants, extracting intelligence about planned escapes, drug operations, or gang rivalries. However, being an informant is a dangerous role. If discovered, the punishment from fellow inmates is swift and merciless. For foreign prisoners, navigating this hierarchy is even more challenging. Without knowledge of the prison's unwritten rules, they often become easy targets. Some are scammed, forced to pay protection fees to gangs that never actually intend to protect them. Others are tricked into carrying drugs or contraband, only to take the fall if they are caught. Those who resist or complain are beaten into submission, often with no way to defend themselves. In Klong Prem, strength is the only law, and weakness is a death sentence. The hierarchy ensures that suffering is not just something imposed by the prison system, but something reinforced by the inmates themselves. The powerful exploit the weak, and the weak either submit or perish. There is no justice, no fairness, and no escape from this brutal chain of dominance. For many prisoners inside Klong Prem, the worst part of their punishment is not the brutal beatings, the starvation, or even the disease. It is the overwhelming sense of hopelessness that consumes them day by day. Unlike physical wounds, which can heal, the mental and emotional torment of knowing there is no escape, no future, and no justice is a far greater burden to bear. Prisoners in Klong Prem do not just serve time. They are condemned to a slow and merciless erosion of the soul. From the moment an inmate steps into the prison, hope begins to fade. The first thing they realize is that they are utterly alone. For foreign prisoners, the language barrier creates an even deeper sense of isolation. Many do not speak Thai and are unable to communicate with guards or fellow prisoners. They do not understand the rules, both official and unofficial, and often fall into dangerous situations simply because they do not know how to navigate the brutal world around them. Letters to the outside world are delayed, censored, or never sent. Legal appeals drag on for years, often with no progress. The realization that they may never leave this place begins to sink in. Inside Klong Prem, time loses all meaning. There are no clocks, no calendars, and no clear structure to the days. The routine is monotonous yet brutal. Waking up to the same overcrowded cell, eating the same inedible food, enduring the same humiliation from guards, and witnessing the same violence over and over again. The outside world becomes a distant memory, and the concept of a future beyond the prison walls feels like an impossible fantasy. Prisoners stop counting the days because it no longer matters. Whether they have a 1-year sentence or a life sentence, they all live in the same relentless misery. Suicide becomes a common escape. Many inmates, after years of suffering, reach a point where they see death as their only way out. Some hang themselves in their cells using whatever scraps of cloth they can find. Others refuse to eat, slowly wasting away until their bodies give out. Some prisoners deliberately provoke fights with violent gangs or guards, hoping to be beaten to death rather than endure another day of torment. The prison authorities rarely intervene, suicides are often ignored, and bodies are disposed of with little ceremony. To the system, one less prisoner to feed is a convenience. Even those who still cling to hope find it slowly crushed by the endless cycle of injustice. Many prisoners have no idea when or if they will ever be released. Legal proceedings move at a glacial pace, with appeals often taking years to even be reviewed. Corruption ensures that those without money have little chance of securing a reduced sentence or parole. Some prisoners are told they will be freed, only to have their release date postponed indefinitely. Others have their sentences mysteriously extended without explanation. For many, it begins to feel as if they have been forgotten by the world entirely. Some prisoners turn to religion or personal rituals in a desperate attempt to maintain their sanity. They pray, meditate, or cling to small routines to give themselves a sense of control. Others form close bonds with fellow inmates, creating makeshift families in an attempt to find meaning in their suffering. But even these small comforts are fragile. Friends are transferred to other sections of the prison, killed in fights, or die from disease. Nothing in Klong Prem is permanent, except for the suffering. The prison is also filled with ghosts of the past, prisoners who have lost all sense of identity and purpose. These are the ones who no longer fight, no longer hope, and no longer care. They shuffle through the prison like shadows, their faces hollow, their eyes empty. They have stopped speaking, stopped reacting, and stopped trying to survive. These are the prisoners who have been completely broken by the system, existing in a state of living death. For many, even if they do survive and are eventually released, freedom does not bring salvation. The scars of Klong Prem never fade. Former prisoners struggle to reintegrate into society, haunted by nightmares and paranoia. Many find that they no longer know how to live outside the prison walls. Some turn to crime because it is the only way they know how to survive. Others live in constant fear, unable to trust anyone after years of betrayal and brutality. Some former prisoners end up back in Klong Prem, trapped in an endless cycle of suffering that never truly ends. For those who manage to survive the horrors of Klong Prem and eventually walk out of its gates, freedom should feel like salvation. But for many former prisoners, the world outside does not bring relief. It brings a new kind of struggle, one shaped by trauma, stigma, and the deep scars of imprisonment. Klong Prem does not just hold people captive within its walls. It follows them long after they leave, haunting their every step and making true freedom feel like an illusion. One of the first challenges a former prisoner faces is rebuilding a life that has been completely destroyed. Many have spent years, sometimes decades, behind bars. When they are finally released, they return to a world that has moved on without them. Families have fractured, relationships have been lost, and whatever careers or ambitions they once had are now distant memories. Some return to find that their loved ones have died, their homes are gone, and they have nowhere to go. The outside world feels alien, fast-moving, and indifferent to their suffering. For foreign prisoners, the difficulties are even greater. Many are immediately deported upon release, sent back to their home countries with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Some arrive at the airport to find that they have no family or friends waiting for them. Others are met with hostility, seen as criminals rather than survivors. The stigma of having been imprisoned in Thailand is overwhelming. Many former prisoners struggle to find work, as employers refuse to hire anyone with a criminal record, especially one tied to a foreign prison. Then there is the psychological damage, the invisible wounds that cannot be seen but are felt every day. Many former prisoners suffer from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, haunted by nightmares of their time in Klong Prem. They wake up in cold sweats, hearing the echoes of distant screams, the clang of prison doors, the shouts of guards. Loud noises make them flinch. Crowded spaces make them panic. Some find it impossible to sleep in a normal bed, their bodies so used to the hard, dirty floors of their cells. They are free, but they do not feel free. Their minds are still trapped in Klong Prem. Social reintegration is nearly impossible. The stigma of having been imprisoned in Klong Prem follows them everywhere. Friends and family often treat them differently, either out of fear, shame, or pity. Many former prisoners choose to isolate themselves, unable to relate to people who have never known true suffering. Some turn to drugs or alcohol as a way to numb the pain, desperate for an escape from the memories that refuse to fade. Others sink into depression, unable to see a future beyond the trauma they endured. For those who do try to reintegrate, the legal and financial struggles are enormous. Many leave prison with nothing, no money, no identification, no support system. Some have legal restrictions placed on them, making it difficult to find work or travel. The few who do manage to secure jobs often find themselves in low-paying, unstable positions, constantly battling the prejudice of those who see them as criminals rather than survivors. And then there are those who, despite their best efforts, find themselves back in prison. The cycle of incarceration is vicious. Without money, without support, and without a way to move forward, many former prisoners turn to crime simply to survive. Others are falsely accused of new crimes, arrested, and thrown back into the system they barely escaped. Some find themselves deliberately returning to crime because it is all they know, because after years of suffering, they no longer see a place for themselves in the outside world. Even those who never commit another crime still live under constant surveillance and suspicion. Former prisoners are often monitored by authorities, treated as potential threats rather than people trying to rebuild their lives. Some face travel restrictions, unable to leave their home countries without special permission. Others are harassed by police, who assume that once a person has been to Klong Prem, they are forever a criminal. For many, the greatest tragedy is that Klong Prem never truly leaves them. They carry its scars in their bodies, in their minds, in the way they walk, in the way they flinch at sudden movements. Some spend years trying to forget, but the memories are always there, lurking beneath the surface. True freedom is not just about walking out of a prison. It is about escaping the prison inside, one's own mind.